In this video here, we are going to explore a very special teaching, and it's called the sacred hoop cycle. And this is a very ancient understanding that's been around for over 10,000 years, and it's very intuitive, and it's been a very instrumental understanding up to recent ages when man became more modern and modern conveniences took him outside, took him out of the cycle of nature. And the reason why we're exploring this here and becoming nature wise is multiple levels of understanding are in this. One, we're going to explore here how to map out your own personal cycle, because we each have our own sacred hoop cycle, which we evolve through about every month and a half to 3 months. And most people get derailed from their cycle and not quite sure what's happening. So we're going to give you an outline of what that cycle is so you can identify what stage you are in and how this applies to your learning process, your journeying, your spiritual work, and so forth. The next layer of this is when you understand this rhythmic cycle that we evolve through every single day, from sunrise to middle of day to sunset and so forth, it gives you this intuitive knowledge of who is likely going to be showing up around you. What type of bird activity and vocalizations will you most likely be included into? And what would that baseline be, like the norm be for that time period? And in that, when you know that baseline and what you should be expecting and filling in, it's easy to see something that's out of the norm so you can clue in and be part of that conversation. The other aspect of this is bringing us back into the greater picture of how the principles of nature are, that the principles that govern nature are also within us, governing our bodies, our minds, our emotions. They're also within the cycles of our relationships and careers and so forth. And so I want to hopefully make this short and sweet because I can go so deep into this because it's beautiful. Many textual layers are here. But for this, I want to go through it a little quickly to give you an understanding of this framework and begin to give you something to begin to feel into in your own cycle and as you are doing your sit spot and so forth. Right? So we see that all of nature all around us has been tapped into the cyclic rhythms of nature since beginning of time. Primarily because, the wild animals and our indigenous and ancestral people, their lives depended on being in aligned with this cycle. The movement of herds across the land to where food will be, the temperature changing, water sources, the migrational flight of the geese and the birds, some that fly from the tip of South America all the way up to Alaska every single year. The movement of the whales and the fish beneath the sea. All of them have been a part of this sacred relationship. When we see that these cyclic stages, what they really are relationship. It's the movement of being in intimate relationship with place. And if we are to come into the experience of belonging to place, of being claimed by the land, then we want to feel into this rhythmic cycle with where we are choosing to bring our head on rest on the earth. To know these cycles on the path that we walk. And to align with these same cycles and be a part of this movement of nature. And we see this most obviously expressed through the 4 seasons. And this is a seasons of expanding and contracting. We see how the spring is the time of emergence. new ideas, new thoughts. The seeds of the plants begin to break open and emerge. We see that time when we are in the summer and everything is in full bloom. There's flow, there is abundance. There's just more of a sense of ease with life. And then we begin to make that shift where we begin to come in during the autumn time. And it's the time of the harvest, the time we start to collect what we need. And then we come into winter, known as the deep dreaming, the shadow time. It is the time of rest, when all of life fully withdraws within itself. So this is the natural cycles that, as being humans, and that our bodies are of this earth, we are also of this cycle. And yet we can see how, as our modern humans, we have ceased to be a part of that cycle. Rather than going to sleep in rhythm with the setting of the sun, we now have electricity so we can stay up longer. We tap into our devices. We can now produce things and create things. So we have these factories that are constantly producing at a consistent rate, regardless of honoring the time of rest, the time of activity, the time of beginnings and endings. We see that we move into these conveyor belt-like lifestyles. We move onto this grid system. We can get food at any time of the year now, so we are no longer tapping into what are the actual vegetables, what is the animals that would be giving of their lives during certain seasons. And because of this, we have fallen out of rhythm with the cyclic movement of nature. We've fallen out of relationship with nature. We've fallen out of relationship with the needs of our body to move with this cyclic energies. And so many of us feel insulated, trapped, disconnected. So what we're talking about here is, how do we begin this movement back into the sacred hoop? And how do we begin to honor these different cycles as we move through them? Because whether you are aware of them or not, you are moving through them. But we see, like with modern man, because we are trying to maintain the status quo and try to stay the same productivity and try to stay in the good, same emotional, mental state all the time, that what we're doing is creating disease for ourselves, or creating disease for our environment. And this is what is called a degenerative design. And so as we come back into the rhythm of nature, we are exploring what it means to be part of a regenerative design, where life is giving life to sustain life. So here we begin with the hoop cycle. And in Ayurvedic medicine, the naturopathic medicine of India, this hoop cycle is called the trigunas. And guna means the principles of nature. The principles of nature. So Ayurveda is over 5,000 years old and has probably the most accurate science type of understanding based on these rhythmic cycles. And so we begin in the spring, in the east, on the medicine wheel. And this is also the season associated with the element of water, because it is the time when the cold earth becomes liquefied. The sun begins to rise. So this is sunrise. And this is when the movement of life begins. Now, on a personal level, on your personal hoop cycle, Rajas, it's the spring Rajas. That is the time you're feeling suddenly inspired. You want to start getting into action. Perhaps that's the time you want to start doing an exercise routine, or you want to start a new area of study. You have that sense of inspiration coming into you, and you start to pull the strings in order to see that inspiration begin to come forward and manifest. On a nature level, This is the springtime when everything is beginning to emerge. During the daytime, this is when the birds are beginning to sing. They are searching actively for the worms and so forth. The deer are moving from the shadows out of the edges and beginning to graze amongst the fields. This is the time of emergence. And then we move into the southeast. And the southeast is that time of inspired action. That is the time you had your idea, you had new vision, and now you're actively pursuing whatever that activity was or desire. In nature, that's when everything is beginning to become full bloom. It's late spring. This is mid-morning, and this is when the birds are really active in preparing their nest, fixing their nest. They're getting active with their basic preparations. And then we move into the south, and that is the time of summer. This is also the time we call sattva, which unfortunately got cut off in this picture. But this is that time when everything is in flow. This is midday when us humans are very active in our day. We're pursuing, we're doing our business, we're having our business meetings, but there's a sense of flow that is there. This is the time when you'll notice the birds are actively feeding their young. So nature is active during this time. We're in flow. And then we move into the southwest. And that's that time when we start to feel a bit tired. We start to feel a little bit exhausted, and we're wanting to have that late afternoon siesta time. So we begin to shift inward. See, after reaching the peak, right, the sun lowers itself down into the southwest at mid-afternoon, but its heat lingers, right? The plants, they begin to droop. The birds and animals, they mostly lie silent and still. They feel that urge to rest and nap. The insects, they stay busy. They're giving voice to this time of day through their buzzing and throbbing tones and rhythms. Everything is beginning to take refuge. And this is what we consider in seasons. This is late summer. See, the birds' work of nesting and feeding comes to an end, and they drift off to get some alone time. The plants dry into shades of gold, right? Now fully pollinated, they focus their energy on hardening their stems, on producing the internal woody strength that will support the coming fruit. Yeah. So this is that time when we begin to make that inner shift and prepare. As we move into the west is that time of day. It's when the sun sets. So it's that magical moment of shifting into the inner worlds. In terms of the seasons, this is the autumn time. It's the time of the harvest. It's when everyone gathers together to reap and celebrate the bounty of the year. There should be that time of singing and dancing, storing up and giving thanks. The community comes alive. The reds, golds, and crimson of autumn leaves reflect the sunset's vibrant colors. So this is that time when we begin to harvest what our experiences were during the spring, through the summer, and into the fall. And now we begin to make that inward shift in. So we move from feeling really balanced and connected and aligned to now there's a sense of agitation. See, with the trigunas, we have rajas in the east and in the west, and these are those transitionary periods. And so there's this sense of unrest, this sense of needing to move, this sense of uncertainty that is there. When we move into the summer, we feel balanced and connected, aligned. We're in flow. But then we enter out of that flow. And here's where we see a lot of humans come out of balance. And I call this the sattva syndrome. Because you see this especially in yoga, spiritual communities, where we suddenly feel like we always need to be balanced. We always need to be aligned and radiant. And that's where you get all those pictures of the yoga pictures of meditating. And we don't honor the shadow season. And when we start to shift out of that, we start to feel tired and agitated and emotional like we do in the West, right? The seasonal mood, emotional disorders that we often experience in the fall. We feel uncertainty, anxiety, all our emotions shows up in the fall time because of that movement. And so there's a lot of shaming and criticism for when we start to go in that. And so I call this sattva syndrome, this attachment to wanting to be in balance and always be on the conveyor belt line of productivity. But as we come into Rajas in the autumn, it is that time of harvesting and preparing to come within. And that brings us into the Northwest. And this is where we enter into the shadow season. In the shamanic tradition, this is the season of shadows. This is the times when the birds begin to roost. This is the time of twilight in the day. This is when everything is finally quieted down and we're getting ready to enter into the deep sleep. So this is the time of late autumn. And then we move into the winter. And the winter is what we call tamas. Tamas is a time of rest. It is a time of inertia. It is not a time of motivation and being active. Traditionally, this is the time when communities would come close in, gather around the fire, tell their stories of the previous year. They would harvest those stories and the medicines, and they would tend to the things needed to tend within themselves. This is time when the nocturnal animals come, and they are the hunters at night. And so in the shamanic tradition, we become shadow hunters, and we hunt our own shadows. We hunt for our failed expectations. We hunt for our grief and our wounds. We help to navigate through those to hell, to heal, to be in prayer and meditation, to be in a space of rest. So during your personal cycle, right, you move from the summer where you feel aligned, you feel connected, then you go into that agitated stuff where you're feeling restless again, and then you feel like you just suddenly collapse into tamas. A lot of times people feel heavy, they feel emotional, they crave heavy foods. They wonder, how did I lose all my momentum? What is going on in my life? How did I just fall into tamas? But here we see that tamas is a natural cycle. We want to honor tamas. We want to honor this time of rest. We want to join the rest of nature in this rhythmic dance. And after we have moved through the winter, we come to the time of the Northeast. This is late winter, early spring. And this is when the new life just beneath the surface begins to emerge. This is just before sunrise. It is pre-dawn. This is the time when you would hear the coyotes doing their roll call, howling into the distance. This is the time you begin to hear the birds begin to chirp and do their own roll calling. This is the time in the Eastern traditions we spend in meditation, yoga and Buddhism, and throughout the East. This is the time when we begin to do our meditation because it is the time when all of the world is most still. And there's a principle that says like increases like. When we enter into the stillness, it increases that same stillness and calm within us. And so it's easier to go into deep states of meditation during this time. So this is that moment when you're in that state of tamas, you might feel depressed and heavy. It is that moment when that seed of inspiration begins to awaken. You begin to see that you're not going to be heavy all forever. You begin to have new ideas of how you're going to be called back into the world and activity. And that brings you back into rajas. And it brings you into that inspired movement, start pulling those strings to learn things again. Then you go right back into inspired action in the southeast, and you start that cycle over again. Now, on a human level, we go through this cycle about every month and a half to 2 to 3 months. Everyone's just a little bit different, but we go through that cycle again and again. We go through this cycle every single day, with before sunrise, at sunrise, middle of the day, and so forth. And again, we each have our own natural cycle. See, what's important here is that we see that we have a natural rhythm of expanding and contracting in our own consciousness. We're going to have times when we're really focused in on our nature-wise studies and sit spot and so forth. And then there's going to be times when we're just going to collapse and we need to rest. We want to have this experience during the day. And what you're learning here is basically how to come back into rhythm with nature and honor that you too are a part of these cyclic rhythms. You are part of the sacred hoop. The other thing you are learning here is that by paying attention at your sit spot, you will see, am I in the Rajas time of day? Am I in the Sattva time of day? Am I in the Tamas time of day? And in that you become attuned to the conversations, relationships at play, the sacred dance that nature is in during those moments. And the more you show up at your sit spot, the more throughout the day you take that moment to pause and do that sense meditation, extend your senses to be part of the environment, the more attuned you are going to be in these rhythms. And the more you will flow with these, the more you will be in a state of flow, to allow yourself to come into those times of rest, to even predict that. I have a chart. If any of you want, just email me, message me. I'll give you this chart with how to begin to map your cycles. And then it becomes predictable to know, it's like, oh, I'm coming into my Rajas, my spring. So I want to make sure I can just be really focused in on this activity. Then you know you're going to go into your summer. So you know that you want to have that spaciousness of time to really be in that focused activity. Then as you come into the southwest and west, you want to know you want to have that time to really harvest and have less outward focus and begin to create the space to come inward. And know that that's going to shift you into that time of deep rest. So rather than trying to schedule a bunch of activities or try to uphold a rigid discipline of routine, you're like, this is the time I'm going to give myself a sense of grace and compassion and allow myself to come close in and integrate all that I have learned and experienced. And that is the natural rhythm of coming into the sacred hoop cycle. And we're going to explore this more and more, but that's the basis of it. And in the next training, we'll talk about the learning cycle. All right. So if you have messages or questions, please message me. What we're doing here is learning to track the movement of nature and come into it in a sacred way. So Om.